Hi, welcome to The Right Perspective. I am your host, Dr. Nicholas Waddy. Since this is our first conversation, I think I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an associate professor of history, and I teach in the State University of New York. So I think you probably figured out by now that I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, and I'm a Trump supporter. And yet, I'm an academic. This may seem somewhat surprising, and it should be. Conservatives in academia are a rarity, and sometimes we feel a little like an endangered species, but nevertheless, it's a free country, at least for now, and I can support Trump if I want to, and I do. So, I'd like to direct your attention to the issues. That's what I'm interested in. And the issue that I'd like to talk about today is sanctuary cities. Many of you probably know what sanctuary cities are already, but in simple terms, they're jurisdictions that refuse to support and participate in the enforcement of our immigration laws. As you probably know, there are a lot of people who feel that illegal immigrants are wonderful people, contributing to America, and our immigration laws are highly inconvenient because they say that these people aren't supposed to be here. And that's something that a lot of Democrats and liberals just can't accept. And as usual, they tend to believe that the law and the Constitution say whatever they want them to say. And so the fact that these laws exist that go against liberal orthodoxy is something that requires some pretty radical mental gymnastics on their part. So sanctuary cities basically say, okay, these laws exist, but it's certainly not our job to enforce them. We won't help you enforce them, and we'll do everything in our power to obstruct you from enforcing them. And sanctuary city policies exist in various gradations, but one of the most common ways for them to express their opposition to immigration enforcement is when they apprehend someone who is an illegal immigrant. They simply refuse to inform the federal government about this person, and or when that person is due to be released, maybe because they don't have enough evidence to charge them, or maybe because they've charged them but they won't be sending them to court for a while. The federal government asks that they hold on to these people for at least, I think, 48 hours, 72 hours, something like that, so that the federal government can potentially come and get them and deport them. And of course, sanctuary cities don't like that, so they simply refuse to do it. What President Trump seems to be saying, and what one of his executive orders indicates, is that the tactic he would like to use to crack down on sanctuary cities is to cut federal funding to these cities. And this is something that's been talked about on many different levels and seems to be very popular. But I recently wrote an article for the Livingston County News, which is my local newspaper, about this issue, and basically what I advise is I think Trump should consider a different approach. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And, the background to this is I agree with Trump that you don't have a nation unless you have borders, and unless those borders are respected. Furthermore, you don't have a nation unless you have laws, and those laws are respected. And we have laws, lots of laws, related to illegal immigration and immigration policy, and many of those laws have been disrespected for a long time. Trump obviously wants to resolve this issue, but it's not easy because, as we know, there's a lot of opposition to really any enforcement of our immigration laws. It seems like every time an illegal immigrant is deported from now on, the media is going to go nuts and is going to criticize Trump and like he's a fascist and he hates people and he's picking on the most vulnerable in our society, etc., etc. And of course, the left loves to point to all these shining examples of illegal immigrants who are wonderful human beings, and maybe they are and maybe they aren't, but that's not really the issue. The issue is this a country or is this not a country? And if it is a country, then even nice people don't necessarily have the right to violate our borders and live in our country without permission. I don't think that's such a wild and crazy thing to say, but some people seem to disagree. Anyway, I agree with Trump that we need better border enforcement. I think a border wall is fine. In many ways, we already have a border wall. That's what Democrats seem to lose touch with when they criticize Trump's idea of a border wall so much. But many parts of the border are already fortified in various ways, with fencing and whatnot, and much of this was put in place by Obama. So the idea of a wall is not as out in left field as some people seem to suggest. But to those who say that a wall won't truly fix the problem, they're absolutely right, because many people come into this country legally at first. They come as tourists, they come as students, they come to do business here, and they're allowed to do that. We don't want to close our country to international visitors of all kinds, but once they come here, sometimes they stay longer than they're supposed to, and sometimes they stay forever, and they don't have permission to do so, and that's a problem. I've always believed that the most important way to deal with this problem is employers. What most people come to this country to do ultimately is to work and to earn money, and if they can't earn money, they can't survive. And if the source of jobs for illegal immigrants was cut off, I think we'd see this problem resolve itself pretty quickly. And at various times in our history, we've done pretty much exactly that. People pointed to Eisenhower as someone who tackled the problem of illegal immigration very forcefully and very successfully. But, so I would love to see Trump go after employers. And if you sanction employers and you have a vigorous enforcement mechanism and you have plenty of agents out there looking for employers who are employing illegal immigrants, and you have an e-verify system that forces employers to verify that their employees are indeed permitted to work in the United States, all that could do a tremendous amount to solve this problem. And that's probably most of all the direction I'd like to see Trump going. But sanctuary cities still exist, and they need to be dealt with. So Trump's idea of cracking down on these cities by denying them federal funding is not a terrible idea, but it's got some problems. One, of course, anything Trump does is going to be tied up in the courts because liberals love lawyers, and many federal judges are very sympathetic to liberal positions, arguments, so we can expect that any attempt to punish sanctuary cities financially will not only be opposed very strongly in the political domain, in the media, but also in the courts. In addition, the Supreme Court has already held that the federal government can cut funding to local jurisdictions, states, etc., under certain circumstances, but it cannot do so basically in a disproportionate way. In other words, the punishment should fit the crime, and what that means is that the amount of financial support that you could cut to a city or a county or a state because it is pursuing sanctuary policies is limited, and therefore there's a significant risk. One, there's a significant risk that if you try to cut funding to sanctuary cities, the amount of funding that you will be able to cut, even assuming the courts let you cut anything, is small, and therefore will not motivate them to change their policies. And if they don't change their policies, you've created a standoff, you've punished them on a certain level, but you haven't achieved your goal, and that's a problem. On the other hand, if you punish sanctuary cities by cutting their funding, there's a very real possibility that you will cause significant pain. And you might say, well, that's good. We want to punish sanctuary cities. But think about it. Who will you be punishing? Who is going to suffer in this situation? Is it the mayor of Los Angeles or the governor of New York? No. They're still going to be sitting in their mansions, having their press conferences, probably padding their vote totals because they can use this to criticize Trump and perhaps to get more attention for themselves. They're not going to suffer in the least. The people who will suffer, frankly, most likely people will suffer because the funding cut kind of has to be tied to the policy itself, is law enforcement. Federal funding to support law enforcement in these sanctuary cities could be cut. And then, as we all know, Republicans, conservatives support law enforcement. And many people in law enforcement, your rank-and-file police officers, and even people higher up in police organizations, are very supportive of President Trump and his policies, and don't like illegal immigration. And they certainly don't like illegal immigrant criminals, and that's who Trump is trying to deport in the first place. So these are the people you hurt the most, and there might be some spillover. You might cut funds that would hurt public services, or what these cities will do, of course, is you cut their funding, and they will try to say, oh, the pain is so great, and we're going to have to throw sick grandmas out on the street, and babies won't have their formula, and parks will have to close, and all this was done by evil President Trump. You know what they're going to do, and they're good at it. So, to make a long story short, cutting funding to sanctuary cities could backfire. So, I have an alternative, and it's a pretty simple alternative, which is to apply the law. Maybe we don't need a political solution to this problem, we just need a legal solution. And a lot of those legal solutions kind of suggest themselves, because the law is already on the side of those who want to crack down on illegal immigration. So, I'd like to direct your attention to Title 8 of the U.S. Code, Section 1324. That's Title 8 of the U.S. Code, Section 1324. You can look it up yourself. It's easy to find on the internet. Lots of people interested in this issue of illegal immigration have already pointed to it. I didn't discover it. I'm merely bringing it to your attention. Basically, what this section of U.S. Code dealing with immigration and nationality says is that illegal immigration is bad, and encouraging or sheltering illegal immigrants is a crime, which is, of course, exactly what sanctuary cities are doing. This section says that it is illegal to, quote, conceal, harbor, or shield from detection, unquote, an illegal alien, or, quote, to encourage or induce an illegal alien to enter or reside in the country, to engage in a conspiracy to do any of these things, or, quote, to aid and abet, unquote, this type of activity. So, what's the penalty for breaking this law, you might ask? Well, according to the law itself, the penalty is up to 5 years in prison. So, the law of the United States of America, which has been on the books, I believe, for more than 100 years, says that encouraging illegal immigration, concealing illegal immigrants, harboring them, shielding them from detection, all of these things, or aiding and abetting any of these things, is against the law. It has been against the law all along. But sanctuary cities do it anyway. And of course they did it under President Obama, knowing that he was completely sympathetic to what they were doing and would take no action against them, and he didn't. Well, now President Trump is in charge. and now we have a Republican House and a Republican Senate. We'll very soon restore a Republican conservative majority to the Supreme Court. The federal courts will very increasingly tilt towards the right as President Trump installs more and more federal judges. So we have an opportunity to enforce the law. We don't need new laws. We may need the tools to enforce the laws. So we may need better funding of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. But I don't think you'll find that President Trump, to achieve his goals on the issue of illegal immigration, needs additional authority. He has all the authority. Now, again, whether the courts allow him to exercise his authority, I don't seem terribly inclined to do that, but ultimately I think the Supreme Court will uphold his authority, so there you are. He has the authority already. All he needs to do is use it. So how would this work? Well, sanctuary cities exist in different forms and to different degrees. And again, a common form is a city, a county, a state refuses to hold a person who they suspect of being an illegal immigrant or they know is an illegal immigrant long enough so that federal authorities can come and apprehend them and deport them. And they say this just isn't their job. Can, let's say, a mayor, a county executive, a sheriff, a governor had this policy in place, could you charge them under Section 1324 of Title 8 of the U.S. Code? Maybe. It's possible. Obviously, this would require some. The Department of Justice under Jeff Sessions would have to look at this very carefully. U.S. attorneys would have to weigh the evidence in each individual case. And I'm not suggesting that every mayor, governor, etc. in this country who has initiated any type of sanctuary policy be charged with a crime and put in jail. But I think what might be easier, and again, there are a lot of nuances in these sanctuary policies, but many Democratic politicians have made innumerable statements in public, the intent of which is clearly to, quote, conceal, harbor, or shield from detection, encourage or induce illegal immigration. That is to say, to illegal immigrants, you are welcome here. Come here, and you will be safe, and I will keep you safe. To me, that the intent there is pretty obvious. At a minimum, they are aiding and abetting the commission of a crime, which is the concealing and harboring of an illegal immigrant. But in many cases, they're going beyond that. So, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know exactly how you would decide who to charge and who not to charge. But I do think there's an opportunity here. You could clearly make a case that some of these sanctuary policies represent an obstruction of justice and a willful obstruction of justice, and that's a whole different part of the law that certainly could be explored. But this part of the law, Section 1324 of Title 8, seems quite clear to me. And I think it represents an opportunity for President Trump to visit legal consequences on those who defy U.S. federal immigration law and use sanctuary policies. And I hate to say it, but a lot of this battle is playing out in terms of intimidation. The media, protesters are trying to get their way by intimidating President Trump and saying, okay, you deport a single person, well, we're going to tie you up in court for the rest of your life, and we're going to protest daily, and every time a Republican politician appears in person, they're going to have things thrown at them, and insults hurled at them, and these are the consequences for you pursuing the policies that you believe are right. Well, to some extent, they have a right to do these things. But the important thing is that Republicans and Trump not be intimidated. But I think in some ways, if Democrats are going to be that ruthless in pursuing their ideas about what's right, then we need to respond in kind. And that means that we need to confront them with the consequences, the worst possible consequences of their own actions. And when you break the law, as I believe many mayors and governors and other public officials are doing, by actively undermining U.S. federal immigration laws and creating administrative mechanisms, funding formulas, etc., that are designed to do so, then I think they should understand that not only are they liable to potential civil action, for example, if your sanctuary city, say someone gets killed by an illegal immigrant and you're shielded by your sanctuary policies, well, maybe you, as that public official, could be held legally responsible. You could be sued, in other words, sued for monetary damages. Well, that's something that maybe people should think about. It's probably hard to do. But I think you should also be liable to criminal prosecution. So again, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that ultimately, if you want a country in which the law is respected, then you need to be a country in which the law is enforced. And this is a section of our laws that really hasn't been talked about much, and it certainly hasn't been applied. One of the most important things about living in a democracy, living in a modern Western country, is that we have a rule of law, and the rule of law applies equally to everyone. The idea isn't that, well, you can break the law if we like you. You can break the law if you're powerful. You can break the law if you're in certain demographic groups that are protected and favored and by whatever your political ideology happens to be. It's supposed to be the case that the law applies equally to everyone. And this is a case where I think President Trump can achieve one of his central objectives, which is to end illegal immigration and to improve the enforcement of our immigration laws. But he can also do so in a way that benefits the rule of law itself. Now, you can imagine what the response will be from the left if he tries this. They have accused him of being a fascist and a Nazi and a dictator already on entirely specious grounds. But if he begins to prosecute or to seek the prosecution of some of his political enemies, you can imagine what people will say. So this is a strategy that needs to be pursued very carefully and judiciously. And again, I'm not recommending the wholesale prosecution of everyone who's a Democrat. But I think this is a strategy that could bear fruit. And I have to believe that from the perspective of these mayors and governors, and also legislators, I believe legislators could also be liable to this kind of prosecution. I have to believe that as soon as they realize that there are potential legal consequences that impinge on themselves, that there's an actual law out there written down that could be applied by prosecutors and judges, etc., and could apply to them, and could put them in jail, potentially, or enforce other punishments on them. Their perspective on this issue is going to change. Up to now, these people have been empowered, and they feel entitled to break the law and to disrespect federal law. And I think a message needs to be sent to them that is simply not the case. So, that's what my article was about. That's my suggestion to President Trump. and I suppose even more so, it's a suggestion to Jeff Sessions, our new Attorney General. I think Jeff Sessions is going to be a breath of fresh air in so many ways. And I have a lot of optimism about what he can do with the Department of Justice. So, I'm just a layman. I've come across this part of the law. It seems to me that there are an awful lot of people in this country breaking it. It seems to me that one of our most fundamental problems in America could potentially be resolved or partly resolved by enforcing this part of the law. And it's always nice to find a solution to a problem that doesn't involve passing new laws, because as we all know, Congress is sluggish at best when it comes to innovations in policy, changing funding formulas, passing new laws, etc. So this is something President Trump and U.S. attorneys and the Department of Justice and ICE can do on their own initiative. And if they can find some clear cases where this law has been flagrantly violated and act accordingly, I think this could help make America great again. So, those are my 2 cents for today. I'll be back soon with more to say on other issues. I hope you enjoyed this little commentary, and I'll see you next time.